You know what really grinds my gears about these pompous space lizards? Sarah drummed her fingers on the holographic display, causing ripples of distortion in the alien text she was supposed to be translating. They think they invented everything. Like, literally everything. Commander Chen looked up from his own workstation, his weathered face illuminated by the soft blue glow of multiple screens. Let me guess, they're claiming they invented coffee next? Worse. Sarah spun her chair around, nearly knocking over her third cup of very human-invented coffee. They're saying they invented language. Not just their language, all language. According to the grand archives of the Zxxith Imperium. She affected a mockingly formal tone. The gift of structured communication was bestowed upon the lesser races by their benevolent ancestors. That's actually hilarious, Chen chuckled, but his expression quickly turned thoughtful. Though I suppose from their perspective, watching younger species stumble their way into space while speaking what they consider primitive languages, it might seem that way. Sarah snorted. Yeah, well, they can take their superiority complex and shove it right up their... She froze mid-sentence, staring at a particular sequence of glyphs that had just scrolled across her screen. Holy shit! What? Chen was already moving toward her station, recognizing the tone in her voice. The one that meant either breakthrough or breakdown was imminent. Look at this. Sarah's fingers flew across the haptic interface, isolating a specific section of text. These aren't just similar patterns. This is Sanskrit. Well, not exactly Sanskrit, but it's so close it's undeniable. The root structures, the phonetic evolution. Commander, their ancient holy tongue is practically a dialect of Proto-Indo-European. Chen blinked slowly, processing the implications. You're telling me their revered ancestral language, the one they claim proves their cosmic superiority? It's basically Earth's linguistic grandmother. They've been running around the galaxy acting all high and mighty while literally speaking a corrupted version of human prehistoric languages. The commander's usually stoic face broke into a wide grin. Oh, this is too good. How certain are you? Sarah was already pulling up comparative analyses, her excitement making her bounce slightly in her chair. 97% confident on the core language structures. Look here. Their word for star comes from the same root as our astronomical terms. Their religious texts about ascending to the heavens use basically the same grammatical patterns as ancient Vedic writings. It's not just coincidence, it's systematic. But how is this even possible? Chen leaned in closer, squinting at the streams of data. We're talking about a species from a completely different part of the galaxy. That, Sarah said, her eyes gleaming with academic fervor, is the real question, isn't it? Either we're looking at the most improbable linguistic coincidence in the history of the universe, or... She left the sentence hanging. Or someone was playing games with both our species a very, very long time ago, Chen finished. He straightened up, tugging at his uniform jacket. A habit Sarah had learned meant he was about to say something official. How long would it take you to prepare a presentation on this? Sarah's eyes widened. For the Zxxith delegation? The ones arriving next week for the Cultural Exchange Summit? The very same. Chen's smile had turned decidedly mischievous. I think it's time we gave our scaly friends a little lesson in linguistic archaeology. Oh, this is going to be beautiful. Sarah cracked her knuckles and started organizing her data. Should I include the part where their sacred greeting, Zxxith, literally translates to Sky Father's blessing in Proto-Indo-European? Include everything, Chen ordered, already heading for the door. I want to see their faces when they realize they've been accidentally speaking human languages while making fun of human languages. Sarah called after him. Their faces don't actually move much, sir. Then I want to see their tail twitches of dismay. The next week passed in a blur of preparation, coffee, and increasingly amusing discoveries. Sarah found herself falling down a rabbit hole of linguistic connections that went far deeper than she'd initially realized. The Zxxith's supposedly unique writing system clearly evolved from the same roots as ancient Sanskrit scripts, their divine numbers, suspiciously similar to early Indo-Arabian numerical systems. By the time the Zxxith delegation arrived at the United Earth Embassy on Mars, Sarah had assembled what she considered to be the academic equivalent of a tactical nuclear weapon. She stood in front of her mirror, adjusting her formal uniform and practicing her opening lines in perfect ancient Zxxith, which, she now knew, was essentially just slightly mangled Sanskrit with extra clicks thrown in to make it sound alien. The presentation chamber was packed. Humans and Zxxith sat in carefully segregated sections, the latter's scales gleaming under the artificial lighting. At the front, the Zxxith cultural minister, Texkalon, was just finishing his opening speech. And so we continue our generous mission of cultural uplift, sharing the sophisticated linguistic heritage of our ancestors with the younger races who... Sarah caught Chen's eye from the sidelines and received a subtle nod. Showtime. She stepped up to the podium, activated her presentation displays, and began speaking in flawless ancient Zxxith. The reaction was immediate. Scale crests rose in shock across the alien section of the audience. Several of the older Zxxith actually fell into their species equivalent of a swoon, their tails going rigid with shock. Honored representatives, Sarah continued, switching smoothly between ancient Zxxith and its modern variant. I come before you today to discuss a fascinating discovery regarding the origins of your sacred ancestral tongue. She paused for effect, savoring the moment. Specifically, its relationship to human prehistoric languages. What followed was 45 minutes of the most devastatingly polite academic dismantling in the history of interspecies relations. Sarah walked them through the evidence step by step, watching as the Zxxith delegates' colors shifted through various shades of distress. She showed them pronunciation patterns, grammatical structures, shared root words, and finally, the coup de grace played recordings of ancient Earth languages alongside their sacred texts. The similarities were undeniable. In conclusion, Sarah said, now speaking in modern Zxxith, it appears that rather than your species gifting language to humanity, we share a far more interesting historical connection. One that raises fascinating questions about early interstellar contact and the true history of both our peoples. The silence that followed was broken only by what sounded suspiciously like a human stifling laughter in the back row. Cultural Minister Texkalon rose slowly, his scales shifting through colors so rapidly it was making some of the humans dizzy. This is preposterous. Our language is divine in origin, passed down from the star ancestors themselves. Sarah smiled sweetly. Indeed, Minister, and I look forward to working with your linguists to uncover the truth about these star ancestors. Perhaps together we can discover why they chose to teach both our species' languages derived from the same source. She switched to perfect Sanskrit for her final line. After all, the pursuit of knowledge knows no boundaries. The Zxxith delegation's translator device sparked and died trying to process that last bit, but the meaning was clear enough from context. Several of the younger Zxxith were already pulling out their data devices, surreptitiously checking her claims. In the end, it was one of the junior Zxxith scientists who broke protocol. She stood up, her scales flushed with excitement rather than embarrassment, and asked, "Does this mean our peoples might have interacted in the deep past? That we share more history than we knew?" "That," Sarah replied, "is exactly the kind of question we should be asking. Instead of debating which of our species is more linguistically sophisticated, perhaps we should be working together to solve this ancient mystery." The chamber erupted in discussion, with humans and Zxxith actually beginning to mingle as the implications sank in. Sarah caught snippets of conversation in various languages, modern and ancient, human and alien, all swirling together in a linguistic soup that seemed to support her point better than any academic presentation could. Commander Chen appeared at her elbow as she was packing up her materials. "Well done, Doctor, though I notice you left out the bit about their sacred greeting." Sarah grinned. "Always leave something in reserve, sir. Besides," she nodded toward where several Zxxith scholars were already engaging their human counterparts in excited discussion. "I think they're going to figure that one out on their own soon enough." Indeed. Chen watched the mixing crowd with satisfaction. "You know, when we first encountered the Zxxith, everyone was so focused on their advanced technology that we forgot to really look at their culture, their history. Their language," Sarah added. "Exactly. Turns out the key to bringing our species together wasn't in their fancy ships or our adaptability. It was in words that were old before either of our species reached the stars." Sarah closed her datapad with a decisive click. "Think they'll stop making fun of our primitive languages now?" A passing Zxxith scholar, who had apparently been eavesdropping, answered before Chen could. "Perhaps," she said, her scales rippling with what Sarah had learned to recognize as amused embarrassment. "We should all simply admit that the universe is more complex and more interconnected than we imagined." "I'll drink to that," Sarah said. "Coffee? Is that the bitter stimulant beverage you humans favor?" "The very same. And before you ask, no, your ancestors didn't invent it, but I'm willing to share anyway." The Zxxith scales flickered with laughter. "In that case, I would be honored to partake in this human tradition. As they headed for the embassy's cafe, Sarah heard the scholar muttering what sounded suspiciously like Sanskrit under her breath, testing out the ancient sounds with new understanding. Around them, humans and Zxxith were already forming small discussion groups, comparing notes and trading theories about their shared linguistic heritage. Commander Chen watched them go, then pulled out his own datapad and began composing a message to United Earth Command. The subject line read, Zxxith Cultural Exchange Summit, Unexpected Breakthrough in Interspecies Relations via Historical Linguistics. He paused, then added, P.S. Recommend immediate increase in funding for Comparative Linguistics Department. It turns out words might be our most powerful first contact tool. In the cafe, Sarah was already teaching her new Zxxith colleague the proper way to order a cappuccino, in Sanskrit naturally. The universe, she reflected, had a pretty good sense of humor sometimes. Here they all were, thinking first contact was about advanced technology or biological differences, when all along, the key to understanding each other was hidden in the words they'd been using to misunderstand each other. She watched as the Zxxith scholar took her first sip of coffee, scales rippling in surprise at the taste. Strong, the alien commented in ancient Zxxith. That's humanity for you, Sarah replied in the same language. We may not have invented language, but we definitely perfected caffeination. The scholar's scales rippled in what Sarah was starting to recognize as genuine amusement. Perhaps, she said, switching to modern English with only a slight accent. We all have something to teach each other. Now that, Sarah raised her cup in a toast, is definitely worth learning how to say in every language we can find. Around them, the sounds of dozen different languages, human and alien, ancient and modern, filled the air, weaving together into something new and unexpected. Something that sounded, Sarah thought, a lot like progress. The ancient library. 3 months after what became known as the Sanskrit incident, Sarah found herself in a very different kind of meeting. The Zxxith had invited a select team of human linguists to their homeworld, specifically to a facility they'd always kept strictly off-limits to other species, the Archive of the Star Ancestors. I still can't believe we're actually here, Sarah whispered to Dr. Patel, her colleague from the Sanskrit Studies Department at Oxford. They stood in an enormous chamber that seemed to stretch endlessly upward, its walls lined with what looked like crystalline data storage devices. Neither can they, I suspect, Patel replied, nodding toward their Zxxith guides, who still managed to look slightly embarrassed despite their alien features. Nothing quite like discovering your holy library might actually belong to someone else's ancestors to make you rethink your access policies. The head archivist, whose name was essentially unpronounceable even in modern Zxxith, but who had asked them to call her K, approached with an ancient data crystal. This, she said, her scales shifting in what Sarah had learned was a pattern indicating both excitement and anxiety, is our oldest preserved record. We've never been able to fully decode it. Sarah accepted the crystal with reverence, noting its familiar structure. This looks exactly like the data storage devices found in the Mohenjo-Daro ruins, she said, then watched as Kay's scales went through their entire color spectrum in shock. The what ruins? Oh boy, Patel muttered. Here we go again. Sarah couldn't help but grin as she explained. An ancient human civilization in what we now call the Indus Valley. They left behind similar crystals, but we could never power them up without damaging them. You wouldn't happen to have a working reader for this format, would you? Kay's tail twitched in what might have been embarrassment or excitement. Sarah was still learning to read the subtleties. We have maintained functional replicas based on preserved specifications. But surely you're not suggesting that your star ancestors might have visited Earth? Well, someone certainly did. And they left behind more than just linguistic influences. Sarah held up the crystal. Shall we see what secrets this holds? The next few hours were a blur of activity as human and Zxxith scientists worked together to access the ancient data. When they finally succeeded, the holographic display that sprang to life left everyone in stunned silence. It showed a star map, a very, very familiar star map. That's the Indus Valley, Sarah said at the same time Kay exclaimed. That's the sacred valley of first landing. They stared at each other across the hologram, the implications sinking in. Well, Patel said dryly, I guess we know where your star ancestors went on their holidays. The crystal contained more than just maps. As they dug deeper, they found what appeared to be anthropological records, detailed studies of both early humans and Proto-Zxxith, written in a language that seemed to be the true ancestor of both Sanskrit and ancient Zxxith. They were studying us, Kay said, her voice filled with wonder. Both of us, like we were their science project or something. More like their children, Sarah suggested, pointing to a particular passage. Look at the way they describe both species. There's an emotional investment here. They weren't just studying us, they were nurturing us, guiding our development. But why did they leave? One of the younger Zxxith researchers asked. And why did they guide our languages to develop along such similar paths? Sarah was about to respond when a new hologram activated. This one showing what was unmistakably a humanoid figure standing next to what appeared to be an early Zxxith. The text scrolling beside the image made her gasp. They didn't leave, she translated slowly. They merged with us, both of us. The star ancestors literally became our ancestors. The implications hit everyone at once. Humans and Zxxith weren't just linguistically linked, they were genetically related, if distantly. The star ancestors had somehow merged their genetic material into both species, guiding their evolution while preserving crucial elements of their culture through language. So when we say we share common ancestors, Patel began, we mean it quite literally, Kay finished, her scales showing a pattern that Sarah had never seen before, one that seemed to indicate a profound sense of connection. The chamber fell silent as both species processed this revelation. Finally, Sarah spoke up, unable to resist. So, does this make us cousins? Kay's scales rippled in what was definitely amusement. Perhaps, though I believe the human term siblings who won't stop arguing might be more accurate. Wait until the cultural minister hears about this, one of the junior archivists said. First we find out we're speaking human languages, and now we find out we're practically related? Actually, Sarah said, examining another section of text, I think both our species have been speaking star ancestor languages all along. We just took different paths with the same inheritance. Like siblings, Kay agreed, then added with what could only be described as a mischievous scale pattern. Though obviously we're the more sophisticated sibling. Says the species that needed humans to translate their own ancient texts. Patel shot back good-naturedly. Children, Sarah interrupted in perfect star ancestor dialect, causing everyone's translation devices to short out again. Play nice. The laughter that followed wasn't just human or Zxxith, it was something new, something shared. As they continued to explore the archive, Sarah couldn't help but think about how languages had evolved on Earth, how they split and merged and influenced each other in an endless dance of communication. Now that dance had expanded to include the stars themselves, and the steps were being performed by species who had only just discovered they were dance partners all along. You know what this means, she said to no one in particular as they prepared to dive into another crystal's worth of data. We're going to have to completely rewrite every linguistics textbook in both our worlds. And every history book, Kay added. And possibly some biology books too, Patel chimed in. Worth it, they all said simultaneously in 3 different languages that, they now knew, all came from the same source. Above them, the holographic stars continued their silent dance, marking out the paths their ancestors had traveled. Both the ones they'd known about and the ones they were only just beginning to discover. Somewhere in that ancient light, Sarah thought, the star ancestors must be either laughing at their surprise or proudly nodding at their discovery. Probably both. The Star Song, 1 year after the discovery in the archive of the star ancestors, humanity and the Zxxith found themselves facing an unexpected challenge. The revelation of their shared heritage had sparked a galaxy-wide archaeological frenzy, with both species racing to uncover more evidence of their mysterious common ancestors. But it was on a small, seemingly insignificant moon in the Tau Ceti system that everything changed again. Please tell me you're seeing this. Sarah's voice crackled over the comm system. She stood in an ancient chamber deep beneath the moon's surface, her helmet lights illuminating walls covered in familiar crystalline formations. If you mean the fact that we're standing in what appears to be a star ancestor karaoke bar, then yes, I'm seeing it, responded Dr. Patel, who had become her regular partner in these expeditions. Kay, who had insisted on joining this particular mission, made a sound that her translator rendered as somewhere between a laugh and a hiccup. That's not exactly what this is, but you're not entirely wrong either. The chamber was circular, its walls lined with crystals that seemed to pulse with a faint inner light. In the center stood what could only be described as a podium, though its design suggested it was meant for something more significant than simple speeches. It's a harmonics chamber, Kay explained, her scales shifting through excited patterns. According to some of our oldest legends, The star ancestors could sing to the universe itself. Sarah approached the podium, noting how its surface responded to her proximity with subtle changes in luminescence. You mean like the theoretical quantum harmonic connections we've been studying? The ones that seem to link certain astronomical phenomena? Exactly. Kay moved to join her own scales beginning to glow slightly in response to the ancient technology.
We always thought it was just a metaphor, the idea that they could sing to the stars. But what if they literally used harmonics to manipulate quantum states? Patel finished, already pulling out his scanning equipment.
That would explain some of the more unusual properties we've observed in their technology. Sarah ran her hand over the podium's surface, feeling a subtle vibration. Without thinking, she began humming an ancient Sanskrit hymn, one of the oldest known to humanity. The effect was immediate and stunning. The crystals around them blazed to life, and a harmonic resonance filled the chamber. More surprisingly, Kay's scales began to glow in perfect synchronization with the crystal pulses.
That's our most sacred ancestral tone sequence, Kay said in astonishment. How did you know it?
I didn't, Sarah replied, equally shocked. That was the Samaveda hymn of creation, one of humanity's oldest surviving musical pieces. Patel's scanner was going crazy. The frequencies match. They're exactly the same sequence, just separated by thousands of years and light years of space. Of course they are, a new voice said, causing everyone to spin around. In the center of the chamber, a holographic figure had appeared. Humanoid, but not quite human, with features that somehow managed to suggest both human and Zxxith characteristics. A star ancestor, Kay breathed, her scales now glowing so brightly they almost hurt to look at. The figure smiled. We had many names, but that one serves as well as any. We've been waiting a long time for our children to find their way back here. Sarah's scientific mind was racing. You're not really here, are you? This is some kind of quantum-locked AI system, triggered by the harmonic sequence? Smart girl. The figure's smile widened. Always asking the right questions, just like your ancestors. Both sets of them. She? Gestured around the chamber. This is a key, you see. One of many we left scattered across the galaxy. We couldn't directly give you the knowledge. That would have stunted your growth. But we could leave breadcrumbs. The shared languages, Patel said. The similar technological foundations? The compatible harmonics in our biology, Kay added, her scales still pulsing in time with the chamber's resonance. All threads in the same tapestry, the figure confirmed. We didn't just guide your evolution. We created a path for you to follow back to each other, and eventually to what we discovered. Which was what? Sarah asked, though something in her bones told her she already knew the answer. That the universe itself is a song, the figure said simply. And when you learn to sing it properly. The hologram gestured, and suddenly the chamber seemed to expand, showing them a view of reality that made their minds spin. Quantum strings vibrated like harp strings, dark matter flowed like music given form, and the very fabric of space-time danced to rhythms they could almost understand. Holy shit, Patel eloquently summarized. Indeed, the figure seemed amused. This chamber is both a lesson and a test. The fact that you triggered it together, completely by accident, using harmonics preserved in both your cultures, well, that suggests you're ready for the next step. Which is? Kay asked. Learning to sing together, of course. The figure's form began to fade. The universe is vast, and its song complex. It takes many voices, working in harmony, to truly join the cosmic choir. Wait! Sarah called out. We have so many questions! Of course you do. You're our children, after all. The figure was almost gone now, but you don't need us to answer them anymore. You have each other, and you have the song. As the hologram vanished, the chamber's crystals settled into a soft, pulsing glow. The three scientists stood in silence for a moment, processing what they'd just experienced. Finally, Sarah spoke. So, who's up for some interspecies choir practice? Kay's scales rippled with laughter. You know, in all our sacred texts about the star ancestors, they never mentioned their terrible sense of humor. I'm starting to think that might have been a human contribution. Hey, Sarah protested. I'll have you know that puns are a highly sophisticated form of communication. Children, Patel interrupted in the star ancestor dialect, perfectly mimicking the hologram's tone. Focus. We have a universe to sing to. As they began the careful process of documenting and studying the chamber, Sarah couldn't help but think about how far they'd come. From linguistic squabbles to shared heritage to this.
Whatever this was.
You know what this means, she said as they worked. We're going to have to rewrite the physics textbooks too. And the music theory ones, Kay added. And probably every other textbook we've got, Patel concluded. They looked at each other and spoke simultaneously in 3 languages that were really one. Worth it. Above them, the stars continued their eternal dance. But now they could hear the music that accompanied it. And somewhere, in dimensions they were only beginning to understand, their ancestors watched and listened as their children began to learn the universe's oldest song, the resonance protocol. That's not how you do it! Sarah's exasperated voice echoed through the quantum harmonics lab. You can't just mash frequencies together and hope they work. This isn't a garage band. We're trying to manipulate the fundamental forces of the universe. 6 months had passed since the discovery of the star ancestors' harmonic chamber, and progress had been interesting. The joint human Zxxith research initiative, dubbed Project Orpheus by someone with a flair for mythological references, had taken over an entire space station in neutral territory. Kay's scales flickered with what Sarah had learned was the Zxxith equivalent of an eye roll. Perhaps if your species didn't insist on treating quantum harmonics like some kind of concert. Actually, Dr. Patel interrupted from his workstation, where complex wave patterns danced across multiple holographic displays. She's right. Look at these concordance patterns. The star ancestors didn't just randomly combine frequencies. They wove them together like a symphony. A symphony that can literally bend space-time, Sarah added, unable to keep the excitement out of her voice despite her frustration. We're just missing something, some fundamental principle that ties it all together. That was when the station's alert system began blaring. Folks? Commander Chen's voice came over the intercom. We've got a situation up here. You might want to see this. The 3 scientists rushed to the observation deck, where Chen stood staring out at what should have been empty space. Instead, they saw a massive distortion, like a heat mirage scaled up to cosmic proportions. Please tell me that's not our fault, Sarah said, though she already knew the answer. According to these readings, Chen replied, gesturing to a nearby display, it's resonating with exactly the frequencies you were just working with. But it's growing. Kay's scales had shifted to their warning coloration. Those patterns, they're similar to what we saw in the harmonic chamber, but they're wrong somehow. Discordant. Like feedback, Patel muttered, already running calculations on his tablet. We created a quantum harmonic feedback loop, and if these numbers are right, it's going to keep growing, Sarah finished. Until it tears a hole in space-time, Kay concluded, her scales now pulsing with urgent patterns. We need to stop it. How? Chen demanded. Can we just turn it off? Sarah was already shaking her head. It's self-sustaining now. We need to cancel it out. Like acoustic noise cancellation, but on a quantum level. The star ancestors must have had fail-safes for this kind of thing, Patel reasoned. They wouldn't have left us this technology without the hymn, Kay suddenly exclaimed. Sarah, remember how the harmonic chamber responded to both our ancient songs? What if we tried combining them properly this time? Sarah caught on immediately. Not mashing them together, but harmonizing them. They finished together. Chen looked between them. Whatever you're going to do it fast. That distortion is starting to affect our structural integrity. The next few minutes were controlled chaos as they rushed back to the lab. Sarah and Kay took their positions at the quantum harmonic interface, a modified version of the podium they'd found in the ancient chamber, while Patel coordinated the frequency modulators. Ready? Sarah asked, her hands hovering over the controls. Kay's scales had settled into their focused configuration. Ready, though I feel compelled to point out that if we get this wrong, we create an even bigger tear in space-time and potentially destroy this entire sector? Sarah grinned, just like karaoke night back in grad school. Your species' use of humor in crisis situations continues to baffle me, Kay replied, but her scales showed amusement. They began. Sarah started with the ancient Sanskrit hymn, letting the pure tones flow through the quantum interface. Kay joined in with the Zxxith harmony, their frequencies weaving together in patterns that seemed to resonate with reality itself. On his displays, Patel watched as the wave functions began to align. It's working. The distortion is responding to the harmonic pattern. Just keep it steady and... That's when everything went sideways. Literally. The station lurched as a new wave of quantum distortion hit them. Alarms blared, and for a moment Sarah could have sworn she saw multiple versions of the lab overlapping. like reality itself was having trouble deciding which version should exist.
We need more power!
Kay called out, her scales now glowing bright enough to cast shadows.
The feedback loop is fighting back! We don't have more power! Patel shouted back.
We're already redlining the quantum core. Sarah stared at the harmonics display, watching the patterns twist and dance. Something about them seemed familiar, not just from their research, but from... We don't need more power, she said suddenly. We need more singers. Before anyone could stop her, she hit the station's broadcast controls, sending their harmonic pattern out on all frequencies.
This is Dr. Sarah Chen of the Human Zxxith Research Initiative. If you can hear this signal, we need your help. Match these frequencies. Sing with us.
Are you insane?
Patel yelped.
You can't just ask random ships to... But it was already happening. First one signal, then another, and another joined their broadcast. Ships from both species, happening to pass through the sector, began responding to the harmonic pattern. Like an impromptu choir spanning light years, they added their voices to the song. On Patel's displays, the wave functions began to stabilize. The quantum distortion, faced with a harmony it couldn't corrupt, started to collapse in on itself. It's working! Kay's scales were pulsing in time with the combined frequencies.
The feedback loop is breaking down!
Sarah felt it the moment everything clicked into place. The harmonics weren't just canceling out the distortion, they were teaching it a new pattern. Like parents showing children how to sing in key, they were teaching space-time itself a better way to resonate. The distortion collapsed with what felt like an audible pop, though sound couldn't actually travel through space. In its place remained a subtle shimmer, like the aurora borealis stretched across the stars. What is that? Commander Chen's voice came over the intercom, filled with wonder. Kay checked her readings, then did something Sarah had never seen before. Her scales shifted through every color in their spectrum at once. It's a quantum harmonic lattice. Stable, self-sustaining, and beautiful. We didn't just stop the feedback loop, Patel realized, staring at his data. We created something new, something the star ancestors might have been trying to teach us how to build all along. Sarah looked out at the shimmering lattice of quantum harmonics. A network, she said softly. They wanted us to learn how to weave the fabric of space-time together. Not just to travel through it, but to sing to it, to make it better. And it took both our species working together to figure it out, Kay added, along with about 24 random ships that probably think we're completely insane now. Speaking of which, Patel checked his communications panel. We're getting a lot of messages. Everyone wants to know what just happened, and... He winced slightly. The Zxxith High Council and Earth Central Command are both demanding immediate reports. Tell them... Sarah paused, considering. Tell them we just had our first successful quantum choir practice. I am not putting that in an official report, Chen's voice cut in. Fine, Sarah conceded. Tell them we've made a breakthrough in quantum harmonic engineering through cross-species collaboration. And maybe leave out the part where we almost ripped a hole in space-time. Too late, Kay said, checking her own communications. My scales are already getting messages from other Zxxith who felt the harmonic distortion. They're excited. Excited about almost destroying a sector of space? Excited about proof that the star ancestors' gifts went beyond language and genetics, that we truly are meant to shape the universe together. Kay's scales settled into a pattern of deep satisfaction. Also, several of them want to know when the next choir practice is. Sarah couldn't help but laugh. You know what this means, right? That we're going to have to rewrite the quantum physics textbooks? Patel suggested. That too. But I was thinking... Sarah gestured to the shimmering quantum lattice outside. We're going to need a bigger music room. As if in response, the lattice pulsed with new patterns, its quantum harmonics singing softly to anyone who knew how to listen. And for the first time, both humans and Zxxith were starting to understand the lyrics. To be continued,